Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alistair. Pashu, are you going to do an intro or?
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Alistair, for being here. Welcome to the Learning Planet Festival. We've started on January 24th with the International Day of Education. The Learning Planet Festival is it's actually, we do that with the UNESCO in partnership with UNESCO and over 300 partners all over the world with over 500 events this week happening during the whole week. And it's a great pleasure to be here. And today, now at 2 p.m., we're welcoming Alistair Croll, who is based right now in Montreal. And I think you're the first person to introduce yourself. So I'd let you introduce yourself. And of course, thank you so much again for giving this talk.
Sure. Yeah, I can give a little background. Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. En fait, je suis à Montréal. Je vais faire ma présentation en anglais, mais si vous avez des questions que vous voulez poser dans le chat ou bien sur Twitter, n'hésitez pas de me les poser et je ferai mon possible de vous répondre en français ou en anglais. Pashu and the team have invited me here to give you a talk about what I think about the future of learning. That's a big topic because learning is a very broad subject and it's going to change dramatically in the coming years. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background, but I find that when things are big and very complicated, it's very important to go back to first principles or original ideas. And so I'm going to take things way back to fundamentals and try to build up on what I think education is, why we learn, and how that's going to change. Whenever things get complicated, I like to go back to very basic things because I find it's useful to force myself to work things out from scratch instead of just relying on existing patterns. Because when things change a lot, those patterns are often wrong. So I'm going to take things all the way back to matter, energy, and information. First of all, let's talk about matter for a second. And I should point out that I had some help making all of these slides because these slides were hallucinated by an AI algorithm called Midjourney. So even the art in here is me being helped by a computer. Let's talk about matter for a second. If you looked at the Big Bang, the beginning of existence itself, hydrogen and helium were around from the very beginning, but the universe was just a bunch of hydrogen and helium rapidly moving away from something. At least that's what we think. And then back in 1957, we realized that heavier elements were created when a star, which was a cluster of hydrogen and helium, burns up all its hydrogen, which it has turned into helium, and then starts fusing those molecules together, those atoms together, into more and more dense molecules. And that's where we get heavier molecules like carbon from. They literally were fused in the center of a star until it gets so heavy that it explodes because it has too much energy by crushing all of that matter. And then those things go flying around throughout the universe, and eventually gravity pulls them together into planets and new stars. The really, really heavy stuff like gold and platinum and uranium is only made when two neutron stars collide. This is a pretty rare occurrence, and we really only know this because in August of 2017, we saw this actually happen 130 million light years away. Physics is pretty amazing. Now let's talk about information. You're probably sitting in front of a screen watching this. And you probably haven't asked yourself this question, but why aren't you just a puddle of molecules? I mean, if you're made of carbon and iron and other things that came from stars, why aren't you just a puddle of molecules? The answer is that there's information in the way your molecules are arranged. The only difference between you and a puddle of molecules on the floor is your information. When matter is organized in a particular pattern, it is able to take in energy and turn that energy into more organization. Information replaces you and holds you together. Your molecules are arranged according to information that holds you together, and most of those molecules are replaced constantly. And DNA, the recipe for how to arrange this information, is basically a way of making tiny little machines by folding long pieces of protein into complex shapes. So everything about you is a bunch of molecules arranged in a specific way that lets you take energy in from food and so on and turn it into more of you. And while you're sitting there watching me speak, this is happening without you thinking about it. The only reason that your body hasn't turned into a puddle is that it is constantly, without you thinking about it, taking in energy and turning it into more you. So energy is pretty important stuff because energy provides the means to keep that matter organized. And nature itself has evolved an incredible energy creation system. Nature is energy. And we talk a lot about greenhouse gases, but I want you to think for a minute about carbon as a battery. Carbon is a battery that stores and releases energy. Nature charges this battery by attaching hydrogen to it. And that sounds complicated. We just call this growing. When something grows, it's taking carbon from carbon dioxide and so on. It's attaching hydrogen to it, using energy from the sun, and that generates growth. These things of hydrogen and carbon, which we call hydrocarbons, are just batteries that are charged. We have other names for them like wood or fat or gas, or if you throw in some sugar, some oxygen, then sugar. But these are just charged batteries. Excuse me. And the energy that they store in that wood or gas or fat or sugar, we just call those calories. I mean, this is pretty simple stuff we take for granted. And we discharge those batteries by separating the hydrogen from the carbon and releasing the energy. We don't care whether that's fossil fuels or a slice of pizza. We call that burning. And the hydrogen and the oxygen attach, and carbon attach to more oxygen, and we get water and we get carbon dioxide, and nature absorbs this and the cycle starts all over again. And nature has a pretty wasteless energy system. I mean, until humans came along and started using up too much of it, nature had created a system that was able to store energy, distribute it, and then give it to things to allow them to continue to live. Nature is so good at this that system has its own solar cells. We just call those plants. And that's where almost all energy comes from. Sometimes energy comes from a supernova. Sometimes there's uranium that gets squished up, and then because we're lucky enough to have it arrive, we have some uranium on Earth, but we really don't want giant rocks of uranium crashing to Earth anytime soon. So almost all energy comes from this cycle I just described. So let's talk about life, because when matter and energy and information combine, they create life. Life is just matter arranged in a pattern of information that uses energy to perpetuate itself. If life doesn't concentrate order internally, if life doesn't continue to use energy to replace itself in the same structure, it ceases to exist. And energy is literally necessary to stay alive. Charles Darwin defined fitness, meaning the ability to be more fit for a particular ecological niche than others, as the most successful in surviving and reproducing, which takes energy. There's only two ways to be better at energy. You can either extract it more efficiently, in other words, be better at getting it out of the system, out of the tree, out of the fire, whatever, or you can concentrate it better. You can sharpen your axe, which makes the energy more concentrated so you can split wood. A tiger, for example, goes and lets all of the herbivores do the farming and then kills them. That's energy concentration. And it kills them with its sharp fangs and sharp talons because that's a way of concentrating more energy in a smaller area so that it can pierce their skin and kill them. Every niche of every ecosystem we know is filled with creatures and plants that have figured out how to best extract and concentrate energy in that niche. So Darwin didn't really finish his famous sentence. What he said was, natural selection is the survival of the species that is best able to extract and concentrate energy. Now, this is an education conference, and you're probably wondering why I'm giving you a lesson about physics and chemistry and biology, but we're finally at the point where this will be relevant, because humans found an energy hack that no other species had ever discovered. Humans found a way to get better extracting and concentrating energy efficiently than any other species, and that is called language. Language is a form of information, but it's a form of information with a special twist. There's lots and lots of other creatures that can communicate, but one thing separates humans from others, because language is the discussion of possibilities. Language is the sharing of information, the ability to imagine and communicate something to someone else that may or may not exist. If I have no language and I want to talk about a rock, I have to go get the rock. I have to lift up a heavy rock and bring it to you and say, hey, Pashu, have a look at this rock. That's heavy. That's a lot of work and a lot of calories. But if I can talk about a rock, we both have an idea what a rock is. And I can say, imagine that rock over there. I don't have to go get the rock. Talking about a rock beats getting the rock. And that's much better from a calorie standpoint. Language can also transcend time and space. Language is a way for me to talk about something that will be. I can say, when the floods will come, I will sow the fields. When the floods have gone, I will harvest them. I can plan a woolly mammoth hunt and say which way we're going to attack and how to trap the mammoth. I can explain the layout of a castle that we're going to attack with our enemies. Language creates possible worlds. We talk about multiverses. Language is a creator of multiverses. With language, we can speculate. Other species might communicate. Anthropologists have shown that nonverbal humans communicate largely through mimicry, the same way crows do in others. But humans speculate. They create other worlds. And speculation saves huge amounts of energy. Language emerged because it is the best energy hack. Language is the best way we know to save energy by talking about the future and dealing with the future. Excuse me. And so now I want to talk about technology. Because once life unlocks language, technology is inevitable. As soon as we can talk about all the other things that might be, some of those things are going to be better than what is, and then we can do them. As soon as we start talking and speculating about the future, we will find new ways of extracting and concentrating energy, which means that we're going to create technology. In fact, human history is a history of extracting and concentrating energy. When you look at things like coordinated hunting, or agriculture, or water wheels, or fusion, these are all examples of extracting energy more efficiently. We can harness the power of water, which is another form of the sun because the water is moving because of evaporation, because of solar heat. We can harness the efficiency of agriculture by having to walk less distance to farm goods and so on. These are all forms of energy concentration. And then we can, energy extraction. And then we can concentrate energy by turning a stone into an axe, or hammering metal into a plow, or sharpening a spear, or using a diamond-tipped drill, or even smashing two protons together in a particle accelerator. These are all ways to concentrate energy. So, this has been a bit of a science class so far. I want you to think about the last time you liked a post. You can go on Twitter and click like, go on TikTok and click like, and what happens? Well, some amazing things happen that we don't even think about. We just take for granted. Just now, if you tapped like on a post, you changed some electrons in a computer's memory somewhere else in the world. From all around the world, you changed a chunk of computer memory. And those electrons, by the way, were stored in a matrix of gold and silver and copper and palladium, which are all things that were forged in a star. Not just a star, but some of them came from neutron star collisions. Two neutron stars, hundreds of millions of years ago, had to smash together, crushing the atoms into an element, a heavy element like palladium or gold, flinging that element through gravity until it just happened to clump together on Earth so that we could dig it out of the Earth and we could turn it into a chip so that when you tap that little thing, those electrons could change in that matrix. This is mind-boggling. When I think about this stuff, my head kind of explodes. This is how we got here. That copper, by the way, the copper in that memory that you just changed, came from a mine somewhere. Now that mine was probably dug out by a big machine, but the metal in that big machine was dug out by a slightly smaller, older machine. And if we trace that back all the way, those metal tools came from an earlier mine all the way back to a time when one of our ancestors used some shovels, and eventually someone used a stick or their bare hands to dig up that mine. This is astonishing. That tap that you just tapped traveled across protocols that millions of humans have worked on. They had to travel from your mobile phone over the air, over TCP and IP and Ethernet in packets with to and from addresses. They went through routers and switches and down fiber optic cables and traveled as radio waves through air and electrons over a copper wire and photons within glass. And none of that could have happened if there weren't people who built and ran the generators and the mines, and people who fed and healed and buried and entertained those people. The people who turned energy and matter into computer and smartphone and sword and plowshare. And of course, the people that run all that stuff, the people that work on all that, the roads, the railways, the warehouses, the ports that move these chemicals and minerals from place to place, the systems that need to be transported everywhere, the food to feed those 8 billion people, the sanitation and plumbing to move all of that food waste away from those people, a banking system to pay them so that they can get money, which is, money is just an energy hack to simplify trading, so we don't have to like bring a goat to market, we just give you money for the goat. People who manage all this stuff, the governments, the standards and laws and armies and police to enforce the behavior, which allows us to resolve disputes. Laws are just a way of resolving disputes without fighting, which again saves energy. And of course, an educational system. We're finally at education. An educational system to teach language and laws and skills. That tweet, that like, that tap, traveled across an entire civilization. If I said something like, tap like on that tweet, you understood what tap like on that tweet meant because of the education system. You had the phone to do it because of the manufacturing system. You had the network to do it because of this incredible stack, because of years of study and acclimation and the entire history of language and user interface and design. I call this thing the civilization stack. This is the enormity of what it took to change a few pixels on your screen. This is a civilization stack. It is the greatest technological achievement that any sentient creature we know of has ever created, ever. Like, think about this for a minute and your head will explode. This is an astonishing thing and we take it for granted. That tap on that like button is so cheap to deliver, we don't even bill for it. Life, I believe, always builds technology, which creates a civilization stack. And we built this civilization stack to win the energy game, which is the only game that matters to life itself. So where does learning fit into all this? Well, the first question is, how did we learn? Early on, learning was hereditary. We watched our parents or maybe villagers, and we tried to mimic them, and then we joined guilds, and those guilds hoarded their specialized knowledge, only giving it to those who had devoted their youth to serving us. You worked for the smith for years, and maybe he taught you how to be a smith. Over time, we added books and songs and mnemonics and slide decks and websites, and those recorded our knowledge. Early learning relied on memory, which eventually gave way to organizational systems, accounting practices, the Dewey Decimal System, and so on. And when computers came along, we stored things in hierarchies first, like the old directory model, and then we went to search, and search gave us tags and labels and so on, which allowed the crowd to add things to Wikipedia or hashtags, which also gave us disinformation. But if you want to look at the old model, this is how we used to learn. We learn through a series of steps. We observe or listen to a teacher who introduces us to the basic concept. We see that thing happen in front of us through some kind of visualization or demonstration. We try to do it ourselves under the watchful eyes of tutors. We finally adjust their feedback and our experience. And then if we really understand it, we learn and teach and show others. Teaching was a way of scaling up our learning. Once students used to travel far, far away to learn from one scholar. As education became widespread, however, we deputized regional instruction. We would take the biggest nerd in our village, get him or her trained at school, and then send him or her back to their village to teach their fellow villagers. The teacher was the teacher because they were the best teacher in the village. At a more basic level, we learn through a series of steps like this where the scarcity comes from how the content. What we were short on was teachers. And so we had to find a way to grow the number of teachers and overcome the scarcity of how many experts we have who can explain a thing. Instead of one person in a university that understands it, Now you have lots of people that understand it not quite so well. But things have changed. We have moved as a civilization from atoms to bits. The last time I checked, the average North American in 2019 spent 6 hours and 42 minutes online each day, not including their work. That's already a quarter of our lives spent in a digital world. I did the math, it's pretty depressing. If you look at the monthly average users on each application, that means that every single day, 2,500 human lives have passed on Facebook. In other words, if you took the hours that we spend on Facebook, that's 2,500 humans a day, their entire life spent on Facebook. That's an astonishing number. And we're not even thinking about before, this is all before the pandemic, and we're not even thinking about Slack and email and Teams and all these other specialized tools. I'll give you an example of how strangely we're thinking about this stuff. I wonder if you can tell me what the most profitable fashion retailer in the world is. What's the most profitable fashion retailer? Most people would say it's like a Nike or something. Turns out it's Fortnite. Fortnite is the world's leading fashion retailer. In 2018, it made $3 billion US in profit selling virtual clothes in a free-to-play game. That's the same amount as Amazon that year. But that's more about margins because Fortnite's clothes cost nothing. In 2020, they made $5.1 billion in revenues, making it one of the most large and fashionable, profitable fashion retailers in the world. They don't charge for the game. They just charge for the clothing. And that civilization stack, now that we're online, is changing how the planet learns. Search means everyone can get everything everywhere. I mean, it's no secret that Everything Everywhere All at Once and Bo Burnham's song, Can I Interest You in Everything All of the Time, are very relevant songs and movies for our time. Search means everyone can get everything all the time. If you go to Crash Course, for example, Crash Course has a whole series of courses. It's got 12.7 million subscribers. Many Americans credit Crash Course with having let them graduate from high school. And as recently as this week, Crash Course announced a partnership with Google where you can take these videos and get credits that count towards university education. In the US, you can watch these videos and get accreditation for university credits. If you need any more proof that the future of learning is changing, look no further than what Crash Course just announced this week. Now, it's unlikely that you have the village nerd who teaches physics who's as good as the best physics teacher in the world who's available on YouTube. That old hack that we had used to work because content was scarce. The teacher was scarce. So we sent the biggest nerd to university and they came back to the village and they taught. But now the university, the best teacher in the world, can come to the student. Technology creates exponential growth. Wherever you look at the curve, we see growth because scale happens regardless of population. This is a chart of how many books people had in Western Europe. This is a chart of the number of books published per million inhabitants. No matter where you look in history, every curve looks like this. And learning is changing because of it. So let's talk about how we learn today. Today, we have a very different model because I showed you this model here where we had analog scarcity, where the teacher was the thing that was short, so we had to train teachers and send them back. Now, we have digital scarcity. What's missing is attention and personalization. Those students can get all the content in the world, but they're not. Those students can take the courses, but we don't know if they learned from them. So the scarcity right now in the digital world is attention and personalization. What we need for better education is giving access to those students and holding students accountable and tailoring feedback to their progress. We need ways to make sure that students are learning and that learning is turning into usable information. Lately, we've learned how to train algorithms to express knowledge based on the past. So you've probably heard a lot about GPT-3, and we're going to be talking about it in a panel discussion after this. But GPT-3 is an astonishing way of generating what looks like intelligence from large language models. People are using it to, I've got 4 examples here. Here's someone that built an app that generates new startup ideas. Here's one that does translation from English to Navajo. Here's one that lets you type in something in Figma. You can take a design and it will describe your design to you. Here's one that lets you generate product copy for products from scratch. In fact, there are entire product stacks where you can go from an idea all the way to a soft launch automatically, which means that we're going to see thousands and thousands of non-existent startups and ideas and just ridiculous amounts of content. Let's dig into this for a minute because it's going to be very important. A couple of years ago, when GPT-2 first came out, some people decided to try and make an adventure game. And it was pretty hard to install. You had to go and install this thing on the Google compute infrastructure, and it was running through Google Colab, and you would basically import the game like this, and it would give you a simple chat. It would say, you are standing in a grassy meadow. A path follows a stream to the east, and a unicorn grazes by the stream. And you can tell it what you want to do. You can say, I want to eat the unicorn. It wasn't very good, right? You could say fish. It wasn't very good. It kept giving you mistakes. But even then, it was pretty scary because it was giving you words like, I'd watch out if I were you. That was a little frightening, but it still wasn't great yet. I could say, tell the troll about the future of education. And it would say, the troll is the slippery character. That wasn't very useful. It wasn't really working. But that was 2021. Here's a terrifying thought. There's a man on Twitter who has been asking Midjourney to draw images of things using the same tool, just measuring whether it got better or not. In 2022, he asked it to draw a picture of a C++ developer, and it generated the picture on the left. Last week, he asked it to draw the same prompt, and it generated the picture on the right. I would call that a pretty remarkable advance in about 9 months. If you had a student who went from drawing on the left to drawing on the right in 9 months, you would decide they were a child prodigy and enroll them in whatever academy you could afford. This is a child prodigy, and we don't know what to do with it. I decided to try and get GPT-3 to make an adventure game. Remember, before with GPT-2, it generated an adventure game that wasn't very good. It was kind of messy. You had to program it. I literally just typed these instructions into ChatGPT. I said, I want to play a choose your own adventure game set in a future world. This is my name. You will generate any choices numbered 1, 2, and 3. The descriptions will be written in the style of Neil Stephenson, William Gibson. The story begins as I wake up in my AI-signed pod, and it starts playing the game. I didn't do anything else other than give it these instructions, and it started playing. You wake up, something's off. You have 3 options. What do you do? I told it, okay, I choose 2. All right, you decide to get out of bed. All I've done here is I say I choose 2. What do you do? Okay, I choose one of these options, and so on. The most interesting thing about that is that GPT also labeled this chat for me. It decided to call this particular chat AI Apocalypse Choose Your Own Adventure. Not only did it make a Choose Your Own Adventure game, but it decided this adventure game was a Choose Your Own Adventure AI Apocalypse and gave it that title. I probably would not have chosen such a good title. That's a really scary level of advancement. So there are still huge problems with GPT-3. If I ask GPT-3 things like, if it's cold outside, what does that tell us about global warming? It will say global warming's a hoax because it's only learning from what it is fed with data online. GPT-3 isn't magic. It's just analyzing the statistics of language on the internet. So part of me goes, oh, okay, it's just analyzing statistics. That's not that scary. But maybe sentience is just understanding the statistics of language. I mean, there are chats here where you can ask this wise being in one of the chat tools about what it thinks of politics, and it will say, I don't believe in left or right, I'm not like other life forms. Here's a poem about Dr. Zeus, by Dr. Zeus, about Elon Musk. So in the future, it's very likely that we will be able to use Microsoft Office and type stuff, and in the same way we have buttons for copy and for paste, there'll be a button for Go where it will just continue speculating for us or design slides for us. And I mentioned that there would be a Go button about 2 years ago in a talk. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, Microsoft has said that this will be part of all of their Office stack, and so has Google. We will literally have a button that allows an AI to finish our sentences for us, make our slide decks for us, in every single Office suite. There are billions of people that use Microsoft Office 365 and Google Office that will have access to a button that generates content, tries to solve and create spreadsheets, and designs slide decks within the next 6 months. This is not speculation. This has been told to the SEC and regulators in order to manage stock prices properly. This is no longer science fiction. This is literally happening. And if you wonder how good it is, in July of last year, a Google developer was put on administrative leave because he was convinced the chatbot he was working with had become sentient and should be granted rights. That was last July before ChatGPT came out. Google's internal AI tools are 5 times as powerful, based on the number of nodes, as what ChatGPT was released by OpenAI. Now, the real magic of ChatGPT isn't that it offers good questions. Good answers. It's that it understands the questions. For years, we have had to do most of the work in talking to a computer, whether that was carrying punched cards or flipping switches. But now we can just ask it questions. So how will we learn? What does the future of learning look like? We looked at the past, we looked at the present. In the future, we're going to see a very different model. We're going to see the same idea where a teacher explains things and the student listens. The teacher shows things as the student observes. The student tries things and the teacher coaches them, offers feedback, certifies, makes sure they're doing it. The student perfects it and then continues to improve. But we're also going to see the student asking questions and the algorithm responding and guiding. We're going to see the student trying stuff on a simulation. There are already tools that let you simulate chemical experiments and car accidents and so on. The student will perfect things and then deploy them. Once the student has built something useful, they will publish it to the world. There's no longer a need to say, this is the thing I worked on as a project in high school, and this is my career. They can be the same thing because the cost of deploying it is nothing. That means every single form of learning is actually a startup or a small business or a side gig. There's no longer a side hustle. There's the stuff you're working on, which may or may not be good. And that improvement that the student makes feeds back into the algorithm. We are entering a world of algorithmic abundance, where cheap personal guides and easy experimentation allow a student to focus on anything they're curious about and anything they're trying to do. So what are the risks here? Well, there's one very big risk that we haven't really talked about, which is that language, as I went back to it, remember, language is the basis for all of the civilization stack in our speculation and technology. Language has a fundamental vulnerability, because another word for speculation is fiction. Throughout human history, fiction started with Homeric epics, tales told around a campfire, songs and poems. And then we had organized religion and a storytelling class that gave us the printing press, and then the printing press gave us radio and television, and finally the internet. And the internet fundamentally changed in 2008 when we added a like button. As soon as we added the ability to give the creator of a tweet or a post or a video feedback on whether we liked it or not, we created a feedback loop. Feedback loops are what cause systems to change. Suddenly, when our fiction had feedback loops, the creator could see which of their messages were popular and which ones weren't, and they would adjust their messages. Our feeds, our playlists, and our content were tailored to us. London taxi drivers, if you put a London cabbie in an MRI, you will go into their brains and you will see that as they're learning the map of London, their brains are actually changing. The physical structure of a London taxi driver's brain changes when they memorize the layout of the city. This layout memorization is called the knowledge, and when a London taxi driver learns this stuff, their brains actually physically change. Now, we don't have a control group for this, but how has a world of narrative fiction changed our brains? That's a big question. We are spending a quarter of our lives online, and every one of us is being delivered a feed that's tailored just to us. We get to choose what we watch based on algorithms that try to recommend things to us, and so on. We have no idea how a world of tailored narrative fiction has changed human brains. I bet if we put MRIs on human brains now versus human brains that had not had access to on-demand tailored narrative fiction, they would be physically different. Pretty soon we're going to have AI, which will create custom fictional realities for each of us. You want a prediction from me? We can say words out loud and get a picture today. By next year, we'll say words out loud and get a movie. And then a couple of years down the road, we'll be able to start the movie and the computer will look at our pulse and our pupillary dilation and our galvanic response from skin sweat. And we will tell it that we want to feel scared or horny or excited or smart or relaxed. And it will generate the music, the words, and the videos for us within about 5 years. We will literally be able to say, please tell me a story about this thing that makes me feel this way, and get that story paid back to us. And remember, all the art that you're seeing in this thing was already hallucinated for an AI, and it's gotten way better since I did that. We live in a world where we're getting custom fictional realities, and that means everything we see around us has a plot. Every plot has a twist, and each of us is a hero in our own conspiracy thriller. Think about the last action movie you watched. There's always somebody, they're right, but the government is against them, and the private sector is against them. Everyone's against them, but it turns out they're right and everyone else is wrong. What does a diet of that do to our brains when we try to get information from our government leaders, when we try to figure out what to trust? There's a name for this problem. It's called narrative disorder. There's a woman named Malka Older who's written a series of books on information and democracy. And she describes narrative disorder as the inability to distinguish narrative from reality, a rewiring of the mind. Because another word for fiction is lies. Lies discourage. Imagine the last time you were on an airplane. You could reach down to that seat cushion that can be reused as a flotation device. You can feel the wind from the little tube air funnel on your head, or lack of hair in my case. You probably smell the jet fuel. If there's that little moving your elbow to try and see who gets the armrest. Okay, you can open your eyes again. The point here is that jokes feel very different from memories. A joke is something funny, it's something humorous, it's something novel that creates that little mental bridge. A memory is recall. It's bringing back something you already had. If I say to you, what time does Sean Connery get to Wimbledon? The answer is 10ish. That's a bad Sean Connery impression. But saying that is funny if you know that Wimbledon's about tennis and that Sean Connery has a distinctive accent. So by providing a novel connection between two new ideas, I'm giving you some humor. And yeah, I'm sorry, they say you should never explain your jokes. Humor works because of something called a benign violation or an information gap. Jokes violate an existing norm in a good way. And because there's an information gap wide enough to be non-obvious, but narrow enough that the audience can make the connection, we laugh. The midbrain dopamine system is actually doing this. Inside your brain, we have a system called the midbrain dopamine system that literally turns new ideas into memories. It takes these new things, your brain gets a small reward from the humor or the idea, that novel thing rewards you, and it gets parked in midterm memory. Your brain is constantly turning tomorrow into yesterday. Now, in 1963, a psychologist named Raymond Cattell proposed the concept of fluid versus crystallized intelligence. He said there's two kinds of intelligence. Fluid intelligence works things out from first principles. It's kind of how I started out talking about matter and then information and then energy. Fluid intelligence is our ability to solve novel reasoning problems. It's correlated with things like comprehension and problem solving and learning. On the other hand, crystallized intelligence is patterns that we find useful. It's the ability to figure out abstractions by looking at things we've learned in the past, which means the past is crystallized and the future is fluid. This isn't just philosophical. Fluid and crystallized intelligence can actually be traced to different brain systems. Fluid intelligence includes something called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and other systems related to short-term memory and attention. Whereas crystallized intelligence comes from places like the hippocampus, where long-term memories are stored. In 2010, Zachary Hambrick, who's a psychology professor, examined how naval candidates perform in what are called fluid task environments. He administered a test to a bunch of sailors, and that test gave them 4 different things: a fuel gauge, a set of letters, a set of numbers to add together, and a red button to push whenever a high-pitched tone sounded. And doing all these tasks gave you the same amount of points. Regardless of which one you did, you got the same amount of points. But in the middle of the test, the scoring system changed so that one of the quadrants now accounted for 75%. So let's say adding numbers used to count for 25% of your score, now it's 75% of score. Some of the sailors quickly spotted the change and went, ooh, I'm making more points on adding up numbers, I'm gonna add up numbers. They refocused their attention, and those people tended to test high in fluid intelligence. Other people noticed the change, but kept going on all 4 tasks, and their scores fell. This group was high in what's called conscientiousness. The people who did best tended to score high on openness to new experience. That's a personality trait that's not normally a good predictor of job performance. In some contexts, it translates to distractibility. People with this trait, as Peter Drucker said, are less focused on doing things right and more likely to wonder whether they're doing the right things. In our world, we like conscientiousness because those people can show up early, double check the math, fill in the gap, return your car full of gas. They're, something like high in fluid intelligence, low in experience, not conscientious, open to distraction. Sounds like a terrible job, but if we have a world full of AIs, that's exactly the job that we need. That's the candidate that will complement the AI. The balance between novelty and wisdom is changing, and we need to reflect that in the world. There's something called a local maximum in math. A local maximum is like the highest, best thing you can do right now. If you're at 0.6 on the y-axis of this graph, you can get up to the top where it says local maximum. But that's like running up the current hill. You can run to the top. That's a very conscientious thing to do. A more distractible person stands on the hill and looks around and goes, hey, there's a higher hill over there. I'm going to run downhill for a while in order to get up to the top of that other hill. Algorithms ruthlessly optimize. Algorithms run up the current hill really well. Humans need to bridge the maxima. Humans need to look for the other hill and run up it. And educators need to teach them to do so. We've always struck a balance between wisdom and novelty, but with algorithms and AIs, wisdom now has a best before date. And that means that humans are how we update and test our collective model of the world. So for educators, the real risk today is that we aren't thinking weirdly enough. Anyway, those are some thoughts on where I think education's going, trying to go back to first principles. I know that was a lot to take in. Hopefully I've tickled your brain a little bit with some bad jokes and some new ideas. And I will see you in about 15 minutes for a panel discussion on the future of learning in an augmented world. So thank you all very much.